Hello, everyone. Welcome to another video. Here, my name is Sandra Rojo-Smith, and I'm introducing you to Ilka Oster. I always forget how to pronounce your last name, but that's how I do it. From Australia. She is a level 5 teacher at Skills to Change Institute doing Robert's work. And she also is she holds a group called the Awakened Parent. It's actually a community where she helps parents. But without further ado, I'll have her tell all of you what her group is about and what she is about, her niche area and her specialty here using eutaptics FasterEFT.
Yeah, that's a really important piece there. Where it's all using eutaptics, FasterEFT, and my community is for parents to learn more about how to do the work on themselves. So we often get clients, of course, that ask us to work on our children, and my group is really for parents, so that they can learn more about what is it inside of them, perhaps that's getting bothered or frustrated or stressed or feeling like their kids aren't listening to them, all the things that parents often say to us. We're here to support them to change themselves so that they can be better. We would call it like an example to their children, a model for their children, because that's the place that children learn the most from their parents, by what they model.
Yeah. And how does that fit into eutaptics? I mean, how do you teach them as well the philosophy of eutaptics FasterEFT?
Yeah, well, the biggest one is self-responsibility. So that's really about the upper model of the world, and operating from that model. So we're teaching that principle. Everything in our group is about self-responsibility. And you find that, I know myself as a parent, like I based this off all my own issues that I had with my kids, my 3 kids. So my kids are now 24, 22, and 19. And I was a full-time parent for 20 years. I actually homeschooled. Some people call it unschooling, is more what I did, but I did that for 20 years. And so I often would find myself projecting onto my own children, and it was my stuff, but I was blaming my kids or my husband, and I was living in the lower model of the world a lot of the time. So when I found Robert's work, it really helped me to see that about how I was interacting with my own kids and my husband, and really start to change that and change my internal process. So that's really now what I help parents to do, support parents to do that. And we have weekly tapping calls, and we have modules that help them learn about self-responsibility, and also how to live by their own values. That's a really big one as well.
So when you say live with responsibility, can you share a little bit more of an example of what that would be, just because we interpret that differently for perhaps somebody who's listening who might not know what exactly you mean?
Well, I was thinking about that when you were asking me, like, what are some of the challenges that parents have, the greatest challenges parents have, when you sent me some example questions for today. And I think probably one of the biggest ones is my children don't listen to me, or they don't respect me. That's one we hear all the time. And for me, yes, I felt very unheard. This probably showed up more with my husband, perhaps, than with my children. But of course, when I started doing FasterEFT, I was able to then go back and explore where that started in my own childhood, and really do a lot of work on that inside of me. Because when you feel unheard, you tend not to communicate in a way that's conducive to anybody listening to you anyway. Oh, yeah. You tend to get angry. You tend to, say things you don't want to say. You don't communicate calmly when you're feeling unheard. So by going and addressing those memories from my childhood, all the times that I felt unheard, and changing them like we do in the FasterEFT process, I'm now able to stay calm for most of the time. Not saying I don't get triggered sometimes, I still do, but I'm able to revert back to saying, you know, okay, where is that inside of me? Where am I not listening? If somebody's saying to me, oh, you're not hearing me, well, where am I? Where is that inside of me is what we're always pointing the parents in our course back to. And it's amazing, once they change that inside of themselves, then they find that they're able to communicate very differently with their children. And miraculously, things tend to change. Yeah. It's really funny.
And so what would you, one of the things working with parents, and that's not my niche area, but of course, when you're working with people and they do have children, they do find their home life challenging at times. And what I hear often, and I'd like you to address this as well, what I do hear is not just the being unheard, but the typical, I'm giving my child everything that they need and they have, and the materialism, and I'm trying to get them. And what they're finding out too is that they're almost allowing the child to, even if they're young teenagers, to sort of like walk all over them or talk all over them, because they're so I don't know if it's a generational thing. So is any comments on that or opinion on that one?
Yeah, I mean, I would always sound like a broken record, because again, when you come from self-responsibility, if you're saying something like, I feel like my child is walking all over me. Well, and also, the precursor to that was, you said they feel like they're giving everything to their children. And, I would have probably done that thousands of times, where I've got frustrated and said to my kids, oh, but I, even given them a list of all the things I did for them today. So again, if you're doing that, you're actually not really living in that upper model of the world where you're being self-responsible. Because as I say to my parents all the time, they say to me, Ilka, well, what should I do for my children? And my answer to them is always, whatever brings you joy. And I mean 100%. Like, if you're doing anything for your kids with even 1% resentment, then you need to address that inside of yourself. Where is that coming from? Because if you're doing things with 100% joy, even if it's cleaning their room, because people say, well, how long should I make their lunches for? Or how long should I help them with their room? Or how long should I pay for their college fees, or whatever it is? Well, I just say, whatever brings you joy, because if you're doing it joyfully, there's really only two things that influence human behavior, and that's pleasure and pain. And children, usually by seeing the model of giving with pleasure, they will model that. If you
is that joy that you're talking about also without an expectation?
No expectation. Absolutely. Given the way that you'd like to be given to, which is unconditionally. And so if you ask yourself the question, am I doing this out of joy, and this is something that lights me up inside, and am I doing it unconditionally because I just love to do it, then keep doing it. Make as many toasted sandwiches for your kids as you want. Pay their college fees for as long as you want. But if you are doing it with anger, resentment, or anything like that, stop. Do something else. Your children don't even want you to do things out of that energy. Or that emotional place. And you're not teaching them how to be a good, how to live in the way that you probably would want to learn how to live. Most parents will say, I just want my children to be happy. Well, then start modeling that. Don't do things out of resentment. Stop. And Marshall Rosenberg is another person I've learned a lot from, other than Robert, who's the nonviolent communication guy, and he says the same thing. So that's a lot of the places I've got that information from.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. And
Yeah.
it kind of reverberates, really don't, in any other relationship, correct? I mean, we don't want to do things
Yes.
out of resentment or out of some
Yeah.
kind of fear that will be ostracized or whatever, we want to do it. So that
Yes.
means a level, like you said, that is a level of responsibility of being conscious and
Yes.
really
Yes.
being aware of from what intention am I giving, from what
Yes.
intention,
From what
right?
intention? Yes. And again, it goes back to where in your life are you not living, your fullest, because we all want our children to live to their fullest, but it's like the hypocrisy of asking someone to do something that you're not doing yourself is
Right.
very difficult for children to handle, that's not, nobody likes that.
Well, and it brings me to another question I have. I've had it, and bless the parents, by the way, if you're watching this and you're one of my
Yes.
clients, it's not at all. But I do have clients that have come to me and said, I'm going to pay for sessions for my child because we need to fix him, and yet at the same time, we're finding out, oh my goodness, that inside the home, there's all these discrepancies or all this how and how would you address that? Because I know Robert has always encouraged that parents get the help, that they have an unruly child or a child where they're just whatever, it's like, well, you need to clean up your emotional stuff as well. So how do you
Yes.
address that
Yes.
with parents that say, oh, Ilka, I want you to fix Johnny or Janie for me?
Well, I was very lucky to have a parent approach me with this exact question about 5 years ago, it was now. And I got very brave that day. And I said to this mum, because her children were very small, I have worked with children a little bit up until that point. And what I find with children is they're fast changes. They're so amazing. They're so gorgeous. But I will say I've mostly worked with children whose parents I was working with, even up until then. So when this
Okay.
parent approached me and said, I want you to work with my small children, I really thought, I really thought about this. And I said to her, look, I really would prefer to work with you. And so her and her husband were willing to take on that mission, and they both booked. I think in the end they had over 5 sessions with me. Both of them. They used to come up here to the sunny coast on holidays, and they would always book in and do their sessions with me. And their relationships with their children and the things that they were having problems with massively changed.
Mhm.
And this was great, because that kind of showed me that my intuitive thoughts about that, and also Robert's teachings, because as you say, they want us to fix the children. well, FasterEFT is all about the upper model of the world, of course, self-responsibility, but it's also about you're not broken. Yeah. So, and children in particular are definitely not broken. True. They have less conditioning. They're so, that's why I say the ones that I've worked with, they're just so fast inside their mind to change things. And really, where we know in FasterEFT where all the issues from our sessions come from, we're working on our own parents and the things that our experience with our nearest and dearest in our own childhood. So if I'm not, and that's where I had to say to the parents, look, I can work with your kids, but only if I can work with you. Oh. And I still say that to parents, and I do work with some of my mum's parents in my children in my group, particularly teenagers. But I do make the proviso that child is very invested in coming to the work too. I ask them, do they want to do this? Or are you kind of like going to punish them or reward them for coming to see me? And if it's coming out of that punishment or reward, and they're not intrinsically motivated to see me themselves, especially if they're older, I really would just prefer to work with the parent.
Yeah, and I think that's really a smart thing to do now that I'm hearing you, because you are working with both in tandem. You're not doing
Yes.
either or, which I think is important.
Yeah.
And do you also manage or deal with a lot of parents that live vicariously through the child? You know, they were unfulfilled in their lives. They didn't get X, Y, and Z. They didn't get to go to college, and now they have these high expectations. Is that still?
Oh yeah, that's another big program that parents run.
Okay.
Yes, definitely. Definitely. And again, to me, to some degree, I think I've done all the different programs. I was a dancer as a child, so of course I couldn't wait to get my daughter into ballet classes, you know.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, I wasn't as conscious back then, but perhaps that was really coming from that place, you know, that I perhaps I enjoyed it too. So that's another thing. But if you again, it goes back to that, is it like 100% joyful, or is it coming from that place where there's an expectation? And if it's coming from a place of expectation, then we really have to reconsider what happens, and asking ourselves, would we like someone to expect something of us that's not coming from our again, intrinsically what feels good to us.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
So,
Yeah, it's really
yeah.
great. Yeah, and so as you can hear, as who's ever listening, it's Ilka working alongside with the parent as well, which I think is very important, because just
Yes.
working with one or the other sometimes, not saying that it's right or wrong, it just seems to be definitely more
Yes.
effective with that.
And I want to say too that I'm a huge advocate for children learning tapping as an educational process. I'm just not an advocate for a parent saying they need to be fixed.
Yeah.
But I know Robert has created, and some other practitioners who are friends of mine are very, very involved in that process. And I just think it's an amazing course. It's emotional ed.
Yeah.
And I'm such an advocate for going out and educating children on how to, you know, be self-empowered with tapping.
Yeah.
That's to me, I want to just make that distinction, that's a very different thing than asking a practitioner to do a session on a child because you need them fixed.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, I love helping kids. And my mums, like all of their little kids, actually start to tap on themselves just because they see the mums doing tapping. So children are just really smart.
Yeah.
And they often, they'll often be sitting somewhere, and the mum will, because I get sent videos all the time.
Yeah.
I will be taking a video to send me to see the little kids sitting on the couch going like,
that cute. Oh my gosh, that's
so
adorable.
they're learning intrinsically how to do this on themselves, and it's just amazing.
Yeah, really, I think that's yeah, exactly. It is modeled, isn't it?
Yeah.
So when you're working with parents, working through some of their stuff, and they're projecting on their children, you're also really educating. You're not just doing sessions on them. You know, it's really education, isn't it?
Yes.
Not just doing sessions and trying to find those references and beliefs, but empowering them to become better parents. What about tips? Any tips that you see that parents could benefit, you know, keeping it within the, clearly we're talking about, you know, FasterEFT, eutaptics. Anything that you see often? Maybe let me reframe that question. Any challenges that you see a little bit more often, or a little bit more generalized, and then some tips on how to overcome that?
Probably the things that I see most often are just, you know, stress and overwhelm. And as I said, they're not listening to me, or they, you know, they won't do what I say. And it's like, how do I get them to do what I want them to do? Just simple things like, when do I get them to go to bed on? How do I get them to go to bed on time? How do I get them to brush their teeth? This is for younger children. And then with teenagers, it's like, how do I get them to open up to me? or perhaps, share more about their lives with me. Those kinds of things. And, as I said, I'm a broken record because my answer is always the same. You have to keep going. You have to keep going inside. Yeah. The parents get a bit over me saying this, but and they're all amazing, the mums that I work with. Like, they're so committed to being conscious. It really is incredible. And they know that it's them and that they have to tap on themselves. Basically, that's my biggest tip. Right. Learn how to tap on yourself. Right. Learn how to tap when you're frustrated. Now, if you've got little kids, you might have to do it while they're there and they're screaming at you, or they're having a tantrum, or they're having something's gone wrong in their life. We often joke about you gave them the green cup and they want the red cup, and you got it wrong again, mum, and this can be so huge for parents, because mothers have a lot of guilt often, because they are always their modus operandi is to get it right. They want to love their kids in the best way they can. So my number one tip is learn how to tap on yourself in the heat of the moment, especially. And as your kids get older, you can take yourself off to the bathroom or something and tap when things get really frustrating, because when you communicate from a place of the fight, flight, freeze response, that's never going to end well. You're going to yell, you're going to, say something you don't mean, say things like, I'm so disappointed in you, or shame the child, and that doesn't work. So we're very needs-based again. So the parents that I work with are looking for the underlying need of the child. That's another huge tip. Like, what do they need in a moment, and learning how to ask those kinds of things, and learning how to speak self-responsibly is another thing that I teach as well. So, but to speak self-responsibly starts with the tapping, because as I said, you've got to be able to stay calm. Yeah. And, that was without Robert, I don't know, and FasterEFT, eutaptics, whether I would have been able to change that, Sandra. But for me, I could go very quickly to anger. Wow. So with my kids, with my husband, if I wouldn't go to anger. I'd go maybe a whole week without going to anger, and then I would explode, because I just suppressed everything and I had all this monkey mind. And so I really get how it's so big. It's so big. I always say, that children, they're like your little spiritual teachers, because and everybody knows, if everybody's in relationship with somebody, and that person is usually our greatest teacher. So we often say that at the Awakened Parent. But yes, my tips are really learn to tap on yourself, especially in the heat of the moment, and calm yourself down before you speak to your kids, before you open your mouth. Take some deep breaths. I think Robert said that on our video. We do have a video with Robert, and
oh, really?
That was his advice. Take some deep breaths, do some tapping, and then then speak. And if it feels like that's all too much, get some sessions done. Like start doing some really the deep work on yourself. And your relationship with your children will change, because you're changing it with yourself. And really, even with our kids, unfortunately, this is sometimes really hard to hear and challenging to hear. You are the only person that you can change. Yeah. You really can't change your children. They're here to do their life. You can model to them what joy looks like, what an amazing life looks like. That's about it. They're here to live their own lives. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, I think what you're giving is superb suggestions. I mean, definitely the tapping is the number one thing always, isn't it? And like you said, and you are actually modeling that for your children. Yes. What it's like to go from this part to the next. You've evolved. And Like, and
Yes.
you've been through it, right? You've been through the trenches.
Oh, yes.
So you're not just preaching, you
No,
know.
I've definitely been through it.
Exactly.
Luckily, these days, it's hard for me to remember. Like I've
wow.
really changed so much that and 9 years on, tapping on myself every day and really doing this work, I can't, I remember all the happy things and not a lot of the other stuff. But my mums, of course, they come to my calls and they are in the thick of all of their things, and of course they remind me what it is to have small children and to have teenagers, and they do an amazing job. They really do, even because tapping on yourself, it can seem like another thing, but they all keep turning up because they know how helpful it is.
That's
it's
good.
really
And I don't know if this is answerable, if that's a word, is what would be turning the other way, just looking at it from their perspective, the children's perspective. What do you think is, again, generally speaking, what's a common theme for them that they're experiencing with their mums and dads?
That's a good question.
I mean,
is there any? I think children are, so I probably might project through my own lens a little bit here, of course, but I would say perhaps this was me, I suppose, is feeling misunderstood.
Yes,
I think
that's all of us.
Confused, misunderstood, because children are they're trying to communicate their needs, and of course, bless my mum and dad's beautiful hearts, but they didn't grow up in an era where needs were a thing.
Right.
They didn't grow up where children had needs. They didn't even know about their own needs. They didn't know that being heard was a need. They didn't understand those things. So I think for kids now, the mums really are starting to understand this, and it's just amazing to me. There's so much beautiful information out there now for parents. Like every there's like hundreds of Instagram accounts where that the mums send me every day, beautiful different quotes and things, and women making videos, and it's amazing. It really is amazing, because there's just such a shift towards conscious parenting, which means really seeing the child's need. And to speak to your question, I think children, if they're not being parented by a child, by somebody who understands this concept, then they do feel very misunderstood, and their emotional outbursts are judged, or because 5-year-olds are 5-year-olds, they're learning. They're learning, and there's a lot of information out there too about behavioral, like these days we know without doubt that a 2-year-old, even up to a 5-year-old, cannot share, right? And yet we're all brought up to believe that we should be learning how to share, and even though an adult has a lot of trouble. Like, which adults do you know that lend their cars to all their neighbors? Like, yes, come over, I'll lend you my car tomorrow.
But what you're speaking to is
who
really
does that? Nobody.
is sort of like the child development, like Erickson's work.
Child development.
You go at a certain age, because I know at university, I study, you have to study, of course, I'm a psychologist, it's my major, or my so it's talking about not just pedagogy, but also like the different stages of it, and that's why, like, when they're babies, they put their fingers in their mouth and they're exploring the world around them, and then you get to the next. So that is very interesting about the sharing.
So if you're a neat freak, so if you're a neat freak, for example, and your baby keeps putting its fingers on the ground and you think that's dirty, again, these are all programs. So you can either see that through the lens of my baby is exploring, but depending on how you grew up, if you grew up where you have a really strong belief in germs, and that's going to affect your baby. And so you're going to project through that lens. So you may not be so good at letting your baby just put their fingers in their mouth, you know. And the same with sharing. If you grew up where you were told, even if they say to you, you know, that a baby or a 2-year-old cannot share, it's not within their behavioral capacity to do that, you know, because you were brought up that way, you might believe that, well, they need to learn, you know. And so you get very frustrated. But, you know, going back to your question about what do kids, I think those kids whose parents are really focused on what does my child need, they're going to, the children's needs are more catered for, and that really is a priority. As if the child's need is not a priority, then we get into a different area. And I think then children feel very frustrated and very confused and very misunderstood, because they're just doing the best they can.
Yeah. And I don't want to introduce, you know, it's kind of a little bit off on a tangent, but you talk about needs. I'm thinking, well, that sometimes we think that wants and desires are needs, but they're not. So now we're introducing again something a little bit different, but the needs, you know, and I can't help but think of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yes.
Sense of safety and like food and shelter, and then you go to the next level. And it's not like one level after the other. It kind of works in, people always confuse his hierarchy and thinks that it's like it's linear, and it's not linear, you know, but belongingness and really feeling connected and all these things. And so sometimes you think, well, what is the need and want? And I think that when I work with people that are parents to well, even adult children, I'll be honest with you, now that I'm thinking about it right now, it's like they're trying to please their child, still the adult child, and they're trying to give them and give them. And it's like the adult kid or the child is saying, like, I don't need you to buy me like this or that, or do, you know, so it's there's a different need, right, to do that. So it's a very interesting relationship, these needs and wants. So maybe that would be another video to do about what the difference is, maybe, perhaps.
Yeah. And also, I think learning to communicate through what we need, because often those particular mothers especially will know what their think they know what their child needs, but if you were to ask them what they need, they would have a lot of trouble answering you, usually.
Okay.
Yeah. So because I work with a lot of mums that are like that, and they just the other day on the Facebook messaging, one of them was saying, well, I don't really know what I want. I don't really know what I need. And we know in FasterEFT that's people often know what they don't want. And of course, Sandra, in coaching, you know, this is very common. Like, people come to you when you first start doing self-development work. You've got to work out what you value, what you want in your life. And it's often when you're a parent, especially because you've been a parent since they're little babies, and then, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5, and now they're 10, and now they're 13. And some mums, they really like that becomes their life, giving, and their self-worth is comes through that sense of giving. And that can be a beautiful thing, again, if you're doing it unconditionally. Like I say to the mums, find something that, if giving is your thing in life, that's so beautiful, but you're going to have to find something that's not your child.
Yeah, exactly.
Your child has a life of their own.
That's right.
And your gift is needed. We need so much giving in the world. I always say to these mums, because they are incredible. Like, they're just so amazing in how much love they have. It's just, a teenage child often has other thoughts on how mum is loving them compared to what they actually want. And it can be, that's a really big one to tack on a lot. Like, these mums, some of my mums, they see memes like, oh, my child, I need to help them be more independent. And they go, Ilka, oh my God, I need to tap on that. Right? Because who am I going to be if I'm kind of the opposite style to that. I really valued independence, and I loved my children being independent. So my style is more like, oh, you'll be right. Like my kids always go, I was the you'll be right parent. Even when they hurt themselves or something, I wasn't quick to rush in and
Good.
like go, oh, and need them to need me. But the more I've worked with lots of mums, I've realized that this is a real pattern with some styles of mothering. Yeah. And I think that they find it the hardest when their children become teenagers. So I say to those mums, start working on it now when they're little, when they're in primary school, and find other things. One mum we had, she started going out, and after doing lots of tapping, she got offered a yoga teaching thing. So now she's able to give in that area of her life as well, and also find other things that they can give and be contributors to the community.
Because if not, it's all channeled into their children. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, like then you can fall back into the expectation, this or that, and just kind of.
And when the child doesn't love them, and they're giving so much love. So when the child, they feel like the child isn't loving them back in the way that they're loving them.
Right.
This can cause a lot of issues as well.
Yeah.
Because everything in their life has been about loving that child.
Yeah.
And that's where all their sense of self-worth comes from.
Right.
So that's really something to ask yourself. Where is my sense of self-worth coming from?
Right.
Good question.
Yeah, I think it's important. So it sounds like what you're describing is also becoming, not just helping the child become independent, but the mom or the dad, depending, I don't want to ostracize men or the dad, marginalize them, but the caregiver, right? To also be independent. And if you don't mind, if I can just share something with you about, so my mom, and I don't know, you probably remember a little bit of history from my thing, but I grew up in a generation where women would stay a little bit more at home. And of course, mom's now 87, but she had me late in life. And I came to find out that I was one of the fortunate people, because I was actually a wanted baby. So that really helped. And of course, there's some other stuff. But I remember growing up, I always say my parents were not perfect, but I do feel that they were teachers, because they had the consciousness to do the best they could. And even though they had their language that they spoke at home, and their culture and their way of doing things, they exposed me to a lot of different things. And I remember one time when I was going to school, my mother, I was young, I was probably maybe 8 years old. And of course it was different then. And she gave me some change, and she explained to me, and she taught me how to take the bus, because she said, just in case something happens and I'm unable to pick you up from school, I want you to be able to ride the bus. She wanted me to be empowered or independent. She didn't want me to. And so I remember her giving me change, and I was really afraid. Like I went into the bus because I was, really self-conscious, and I was a child. And in the buses, there's, I don't know what it's like now, but you used to have to pull a string for the bus to say, okay, now it's time to stop. Well, I remember I did this a couple of times. And when I grew older, when I was out of childhood into young adulthood, I remember revisiting that memory. And my mother says, and I said, wow, it's just amazing, because she was very protective of me. And I said, it's amazing, Mom, that you did this, and that I tried to pay attention. And she said, I actually was, you never knew this, but I was behind the bus the whole time. She followed to make sure she didn't tell me. She wanted, so like it was a modeling.
So cool.
It's so cool, because what she wanted to do was teach me how to be independent, but yet she followed the bus. She was behind the bus to make sure.
I love that story.
So it's kind of really an interesting thing. And then my mother was a stay-at-home mom, so I was very lucky. But I watched my mom do a lot of volunteer work with terminally ill children, or she would do things. So I watched my parents model an independent, but yet that nurturing protectiveness And of course, there's nothing is perfect. Of course, I had to tap on my own stuff with them, but just to give you an overview of how they were very forward thinking, even in the early 70s, when, you know, but then when I got older, like you said, it's like, your needs, what are those, you know, kind of. But yeah, I just wanted to share that little quick story.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. And I'm sure you've probably experienced the same as me, Sandra, that when you've tapped a lot on the negative things from your childhood, a lot of the more positive things show up that you perhaps hadn't thought about. And, you know, these days I have such a heightened appreciation for all the beautiful things that my parents did that I perhaps did not. And without eutaptics, I would not have that either. You know, really, these days, I have so much gratitude for how my parents were and can see really just the amazing things that they did.
Yeah.
And, you know, and as the same as you, there was definitely things I had to tap on. Lots of things.
Definitely. Because as our parents changed, you know, my parents divorced, and then that's when really things started to really boil up, right? It just started to become very, very different. But yeah, I mean, I have been told I'm pretty fortunate when you compare, I guess, to other people, and it sounds like in many ways yourself the same.
Oh, for sure.
But we don't come out of life unscathed in some point. So but also I wanted to bring up with this independence, I had heard one time, I don't know if I read it, you know, a psychologist, I don't know what article, but that it is important for the parents to demonstrate, especially if they're a single parent, like a mother, to demonstrate, and I'm going to just particularly say a mother, for example, a woman, to really demonstrate to her son and to her daughter really that sort of independence as well, so they can also fend for themselves as they become older. Any comment to that?
Yeah, well, even that expression, fend for yourself. But I love the story that you just told, because that's a story really of support, you see. And the interesting, what would you call it, science or research that is now coming out is that the more support you get as a child, the more independent you will become.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah. Okay. It's really amazing. There's one of the teachers of this is a woman by the name of Dr. Vanessa Lapointe. She's a great parent psychologist mentor, and you know, speaks regularly for different people about this. But this is really the current research on how a child gets to be independent, which means that attachment parenting, which you know, has some pretty big things that a lot of people still see as, oh, surely that wouldn't work. But things like co-sleeping, things like breastfeeding, absolutely. But co-sleeping, and also being by your child's side, just as your mother was following that past, and being a support person for them as they grow independently. But always being there. It's not, and I know for myself, I was like this, like my children, and often I would get laughed at by my friends because, of course, I homeschooled my children. So there was this kind of stigma to that, would be that I'm wrapping them in cotton wool. And but I was always there and still am for my children, even though they will say to you, I'm the mum that goes, you can do it, you'll be fine, you're right, get on that horse, ride that horse, do this thing. But I'm always there beside you if you fall off and you need to get back on. Do you want to ride a motorbike? Off you go. You know, like I'm letting them do the risky activities. And then I remember they'd go out and stay with friends, and I would always say to them, and I still do to this day, even as they're older teenagers, if they're going out to a nightclub or something, I'm going to be here when you ring at 2 a.m. and I'll come and pick you up.
Got it.
And my 10-year-old son, you know, I remember being laughed at because I would go and pick him up if he rang me in the middle of the night and said, I need to be picked up, Mum.
Yeah.
And they just always knew that I would support them in whatever they needed. So I'm happy to say that my son has just traveled to Vietnam and Bangkok by himself to play tennis. And when he was about 14, he traveled to France with his tennis coach to play tennis with a group of kids. So this kind of myth that support or lack of, or I don't know, lack of support, or, you know, letting them cry or letting them go and do things without support will breed an independent person. It's totally a myth. And we know from the work that we do with trauma that trauma really only happens because somebody wasn't there. Somebody abandoned us or rejected us, or, you know, in our moment of need. And if that, because I've worked with a woman actually who had a lot of trauma, but that was definitely the case. She was abandoned and rejected. Her boyfriend lost his mother to suicide when she was about 9. He was about 9, and he had all these aunties and he had all these people around him, and somebody came to see him every day, and everybody, you know, talked to him, and he was supported completely through that process. And she says he doesn't seem to have any problems with it. So support is such a huge part of being independent.
You know what, that's a great, yeah, and I'm kind of learning that as well, you know, just listening to you. That makes total sense. It's even logical to me.
Yeah.
Logical but intuitive. It's like if we feel supported, right?
Yeah.
And I think that that's why, you know, when things broke loose in my family, when I had that trauma, and it took me a long time, you know, worked a lot on my mother issues. I always say the first 12, 13 years of my life were really good in the sense that I did have that support, and I did have that structure, and I was wanted, and I was told that I was wanted, but not too much, right? You know, I always say not that, you know, it's too sweet, anything, but they were just very supportive. And I think to me, that is what I constantly remember. And my father never, I mean, he was a constant when it came to that. He was like you're going to get through. And he always listened unconditionally. It was like I could vomit, kind of, so to speak, verbally. And he would just go, okay, let's come back and let's find a solution. And he would never criticize me for that. So I think you're correct. That support is important. And I would imagine that you find that not just as a parenting style or this pattern, I don't know if it's a style, but for people who have this trauma, that they can repeat that as well. You know, if you haven't been supported as a child and you grow up to be an adult, get married or whatever, it doesn't matter if you're married, and then have children, and then you're rearing your children, when you don't know how to give that, I would imagine that somebody like, you know, practitioner could definitely help with that as well.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that's, when my parents are there, you know, there's always anything that they're struggling with, their childhood points very strongly, as we know in the work that we do with eutaptics. There's always proofs, there's always references as to why this particular thing is coming up as an issue, you know.
That's wonderful to know that we've got a great modality that we can transform our lives and all our relationships, you know, for sure. But that's great. So tell us a little bit about the group. You have this for parents out there that would be interested in is this a public group, or how do you?
Yes, anybody can join this group. I will say it's a little bit Australian. We do swear in this group. So
that's fine.
We kind of have that in some of our content, and that it's not for everybody. But our parents are pretty down to earth. They're pretty like really amazing parents. The ones, there's a lot of interviews that you can see with the parents that I work with that are talking about. We've got lots of topics on homeschooling, de-schooling yourself.
Okay.
Yeah, things like that. We've done an interview with Robert, so there's that you can see when you come into the group. We have all those different interviews tagged. Just parents talking about the process, doing the tapping on themselves, and how that's helped them to really become better parents, and help them to, and really just more at ease in themselves, more at peace with themselves. That's really what it's all about.
That's great. That's great. And you'll be I'll be sharing the link as well.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you.
That way we can,
yes, all welcome, as long as you can put up with our Aussie accents and our we do have mums from America, from the US and Canada and
okay, good.
Germany. We've got them from all over the world. It's great.
Well, and what I like about what you're just saying, after all, we want to be transparent. I mean, I'm not a parent, but sometimes you need a place. Not so much, it's not about whine or complain, but you want to be who you are, because I think also I can imagine that as a parent, you are trying to take responsibility. So like when you were talking about the cursing or whatever, I mean, sometimes you just need to blow smoke. And so there comes a place. I mean, I think everyone needs that one platform, because again, we're human being. We don't wear halos on our head. Right.
No, definitely not.
So I think that's very,
and that's just me,
I would, well, that's okay.
I do run the group with actually I've just joined forces with 2 other women.
Okay.
That became official yesterday. So I have 2 beautiful women, Liv and Kristen, who are joint shareholders in this venture.
Wonderful. Well, definitely I look forward to
chat with them one day too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really, thank you for doing this interview, and I hope that everyone has benefited. I'm sure you can benefit from this. And as you were speaking, I'll just say the last words, as you were speaking about this relationship and about parenting, about getting really, it's all relationships. I mean, we can feel with our husbands, or our girlfriends, whatever, or as adult children, our parents and so forth. So this is really universal, which is fantastic. And so I'm very, very honored that we had this talk, because I think we need to talk about it. And I love the fact that you're not saying, no, we're not fixing the kids. This is not about that, right? Nobody's broken, and we're working. Yeah. So definitely anyone who is interested in more of a niched coach and kind of know about, please sign up for Ilka's Facebook group, and maybe pick her brain, and then connect with other parents, other moms and dads, so that you don't feel so alone, right? Sometimes we need that. So but I appreciate this wonderful interview, and that's really it. Are there any last words?
I appreciate you asking me and having this opportunity, Sandra. It's been amazing. Thanks for all your beautiful questions.
Thank you. And we'll definitely do this again. Maybe bring on a couple of other maybe moms who would do that, and just have like a round table and discuss a little bit about that. I think that'd be kind of fun too. So
that'd be great fun.